At the dojo, we've developed a simple and efficient way to learn openings, and the first step for us is limiting what you do. So up to 1250 FIDE, 1450 ChessCom, you should not be studying openings in any kind of depth. You should learn to play principled moves. And by that, understand that the principled moves are the ones that have names, the openings that are reputable. In this next phase of your chess development, 1200 to 1800, 1800 is about 2050 ChessCom, you will see that the most important thing is to gain an understanding of the dynamics of the positions you play, and that's where we develop our system here. So today, for example, we're going to be looking at 6 sparring positions, 6 positions that if you understand them, the dynamics in them, you will have a sense of how to play the positions and the openings. And then at our site, we have already arranged those sparring positions for you to play against other people around your level. And we have said how many times you should play each sparring position. Also critical is going over your games, especially the long games. And then if you annotate them for the dojo, you will find that by expressing your thoughts clearly, you will gain a clearer sense of the opening itself. The other thing we have at the dojo is illustrative games. Illustrative games have been used time immemorial to learn openings, but they've always been games of super GMs and the like. But what you will need at this level is games of people, of your peers, your cohort. What do people around you do? What are the kinds of mistakes they make, and how do you punish them? That is the path. So today, we're going to go through the French. I've been playing the French for decades. I feel like I learned it in a weekend, and you can make it as complicated as you like, and I'm going to try to put it in the simplest form for you today. Now, first off, we also have a system with the Caro. The Caro is also a crouch opening, also an opening on the light squares, also an opening asking the e4 pawn what it wants to do with its life. With the Caro, we have a bad knight on b8 because the c6 square is taken by the pawn. Here we have a bad bishop. A lot of people are upset with this bishop, and you should be sensitive to your bishop's needs. However, one of my favorite sayings, there's no such thing as a bad bishop, only bad players. And in general, in any opening you play, whether it's with the white pieces or the black pieces, one of your minors will be your worst minor, and you must be aware of this person's plight. Okay, now, the key thing about the French that's so nice is we are going to be playing for a structure, okay? And in general, what we're going to be talking about is this kind of pawn structure, where our pawns are pointing towards the queen side, white is pointing towards the king side. Okay, now notice this is a mirror image of the King's Indian structure. The King's Indian structure, we would have our pawns pointing this way and white would be pointing this way on e4 and d5. Important to understand that we are attacking on the queen side, and also just a joy to understand that in the King's Indian it takes forever for black to arrange f5. Here it takes no time at all for us to get the jump with c5. First thing I want to discuss is don't be afraid of this. You know, I have several GM friends always complain to me, oh, in the French, what if they take? And in my practical experience from doing this for decades, white always does something weird here. c4, bishop f4, they do something like this, but this is one of the sparring positions just so you can get a sense of how this goes. For example, fine, we're doing great, right? Or we can imagine if they want to really be lame, that's what they would do. In my experience, the position inevitably livens up, and we should not be afraid of this kind of thing in general. Actually, this position, which I think is like, let's call it the critical position, whatever you want to call it, best play, I've rarely gotten it. Let's get into it. And one of the things that I want to stress is that there's a variety of ways to play the French. Let's say with knight d2. And What I'm going to say is I am always going to advocate that you strive for the positions with the French structure. It's a kind of trench warfare that you can become good at, and it's very hard for your opponents to understand. Further, because it is a closed position when they play e5, it will be a maneuvering game. And with a maneuvering game, it's very hard for your opponents to do any kinds of deep preparation because there's multiple moves available. It's not as forcing, okay? So for example, here, c5 you could argue is maybe the objectively best move, but here with knight f6, we are really striving to get this move, okay? What do? We play like this. Okay, and here knight e2 is a move, knight gf3 is a move. Let's look at knight e2 for a second. Simple chess. And now the point is when they take, we simply want this position. And we have a very interesting dynamic here, one where we have an extra center pawn, we have the f file, and then something that took me forever to realize, this is a mirror image of a Najdorf structure. So imagine the pawns d6 and e5 and a pawn on e4. Okay, so this is a position you can get good at. Okay, let's go back a couple moves. And we'll say one more critical line here is instead of ef6, we do want to understand knight f4. Snip, check to the miserable king. We boldly go. And what has happened here? White has surrendered the center and some development, and we have great compensation for the exchange. This one is one where both players should be nervous in this position about what is going on. What we're going to call this good compensation, unclear position. A lot of French positions, honestly, you get this kind of dynamic middle game, and that's what makes the French so fun. Let's keep going, and let's look at usually what's called the main move, right? Knight c3. First thing we want to say about knight c3 is that, of course, in some ways it has to be right because the knight going to d2 to protect e4 gets in the way of the bishop. And the problem, though, with knight c3 is oftentimes white will want to play c3 themselves to protect their d4 pawn. So that's the drawback with knight c3. Now, there's two kinds of French players, bishop b4 players and knight f6 players. Bishop b4 players, I think, are heretical, okay? Do not play this move. This is your dog. You never want to give up your dog. So what do? We play knight f6. Thank you very much. And we're going to look at bishop g5 as well. And this is just a very nice position where we could do a variety of things, but this makes the most sense to me. And the goals here are very simple. We will play for b5, b4, a5, bishop a6, rook c8. Remember, there's no such thing as bad bishops, only bad players. This is a counter-attacking game. It is very violent. Time is very important. And it's actually easier for black to have an idea about how to proceed, as I just described. Usually we'll take on d4, of course, before we play b5, than it is for white. It's very unclear, honestly, how white should proceed in this position. Okay, very simple play for black. Very simple to understand. And let me just say something obvious. When white plays e5, okay, they get more space. But we have fantastic center control. Pop, pop, pop. We own the light squares. It's a light square opening. Okay, let's go back. It's amazing how easy the French is. Bishop g5 is another good move, and here we could do a variety of things. I've played them all. I've played bishop b4, I've taken on e4, and I've played bishop e7. The reason, again, that I'm advocating this is I want you to play this structure, right? I want you to get good at this structure and feel good about it. Now, white has two key moves here. Bishop takes e7. This, by the way, is one of our sparring positions, sparring position number 3. In this position, bishop e7 and h4, two totally different approaches. And let's first consider bishop e7. We, by the way, have traded off our good bishop, but when they take on e7, that was a developing move that we got with queen takes e7. Now, if you know anything about my chess philosophy, you know that it hurts me to make pawn moves. But I want you to see that this move, a6, which is preventing knight b5, is not just about preventing knight b5. It is about the later expansion on the queen side. So, for example, pop, and it's a very simple play, honestly. Pop, and what are we going to look to do? Similar to what we did in the last plan, we're going to aim for b4 later, a5, and bishop a6. It's that simple. Fix your bad piece, and especially if they castle queenside, we are going to get a nice initiative against their king. Okay, let's look at another move here. Oh, that first h4. Now, it's important to understand that this is not a bad move. A lot of people look at it like, oh, that can't be right. It's important to see that from white's perspective, the king side belongs to white. Why? Because it's easier for white to bring force to bear on that side of the board. Okay? Similarly, the queen side is our side of the board. And what that means is if white creates some weaknesses, as they do here, it's easier for white to fill in the gaps. Because look at our pieces. It's very hard for us to get over there to the king side. Okay? So that's why h4 is not a bad move. This is a move that Alekhine championed back in the day, or Alyoshin, as the professionals say. Okay, now there's a variety of moves here. I like this one. It is very frisky. It is a very frisky move. And the point is, there's only one attempt for white to get at us. Otherwise, we will collapse the center. Okay, and it is violent. Let's go. Pop, pop. They got to come for us. If they do not, we will collapse the center. We will win. A lot of times, by the way, when you're playing weaker players, they will easily just lose their center. So you will play mini games in which your opponent leaves the center unattended. It gets smacked. That is the whole point. In fact, a good way of thinking about the French is to put enough pressure on the center and the queen side so that you don't get mated. White must consolidate both the center and the queen side before they're allowed really to mate us on the king side, right? Okay, let's look at this violent variation. It's pretty fun. Obviously, knight d6 and knight c7 are the problems. Let's go. There's only one move now for white. Got to go in. What do? Boom. What do? They snip. What do? We take. It's a very rich and complicated position. And white, first of all, has to find their way here. And then second of all, just understand that the dynamic here is very difficult for white, where we will get the knight back by playing b6 and bishop b7. And then white's king has to figure out what is going on with their life. Okay, very rich and fun position. Okay, let's look at the final variation, the advance. e5. c5, c3, knight c6, knight f3. Here there's a variety of moves white can do. From the white perspective, I did a video called The Easy System for White after Queen b6. I also did a Chessable course on it. You can check that out if you're interested from the white side. I like this for black. It is a very simple setup where we are aiming to pressure the opponent's pawn on d4. Taking this guy, don't have to worry about that. Center will collapse. Okay? Bishop d3 is kind of the main move. That's the whole point of the white setup. Okay? Pop. Pop. And now it's a little bit of a bummer for white. Dude's got to give us one of his bishops, either bishop e3 or bishop takes f5. Now, they might say to themselves, oh, I got myself some double pawns. But this is a very interesting and dynamic pawn structure here, where first of all, our bad bishop gets this juicy bishop e6 square. And a couple things about the dynamic here that I want to say is that, one, we have the two bishops. The bishop on e6 is our unopposed bishop. That means that the long-term idea for black here is to free the guy at some point. So white must be constantly on the lookout that we maybe even sack a pawn with f4. If the beast gets loose, it's going to be a bad day for white. Furthermore, with the pawn on f5, it's very difficult for white to mate us. Very difficult for white to mate us. Okay, it just blocks any of the movement of the queen, of the white pieces to our king side. Okay, so imagine that. We're going to castle, we're going to play rook c8, and then later we'll probably be looking for things like knight a5, c4, in which case you'll see that this bishop sometimes plays an important influence role on c4. This is also possible to play with bishop e3 instead of bishop takes f5. And this totally worthy way for white to play, where we get their bishop, but they can claim that their pawn on d4, which is our target, really, the thing that we want them to worry over, that is protected, and that they now have the f-file. Now, there's a variety of things we can do. I like this one a lot. We block the diagonal. We blunt the bishop here on g6, and we say, looky here. Looky here. That is our best piece. It's our best piece anyway. Okay? But now it really is where we aim to control all of the dark squares. And in general, a basic scheme of development for us here is to play bishop h6 to castle, put this bad boy here, and play for f6 with an interesting game. Whenever we have the bishops, as we're going to get in this variation, whether they take on f5 or they let us take on e3, whenever we have the bishops, we aim for the long-term trend of opening the position. Okay, so I'm hoping you join us at the dojo. It's a very simple path we have to learning openings. And again, I want to stress, until you get up to about 1,800 FIDE, 2050 chess.com, all of the deep like memorization and blah, 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 it's not going to help because your opponents aren't going to be able to really go deep themselves. And what I mean by that is, even if they have like some line prepared against you with the computer, they're not going to have the technical skill to be able to understand the dynamics themselves. And so something I want to stress is, and I've taught a lot of chess over the years, is at this level from 1200 to 1800, it's the understanding of the dynamics that will make you a very powerful player of these positions, to know intuitively where the pieces belong.